I said one word. No. The room went silent. My father slowly stood up, looked every relative in the eye, and said, "From this moment on, you're no longer part of this family." I walked out believing I'd lost everyone, but I had no idea what they were so terrified I might discover. My name is Sibusiso Dlamini, a 33-year-old architect from Durban. I always believed saying no to something that felt wrong was the responsible thing to do. I never imagined that one decision would make my entire family turn against me overnight. Our whole family was together that evening, laughing, eating, and talking like nothing could ever go wrong. I thought it was just another normal family gathering. After dinner, my father suddenly called my name and asked me to sit beside him. My mother smiled warmly while my older brother, Thado, placed a thick folder on the table in front of me. My father said, "Son, we just need one small favor from you." Thado quickly explained that he had a great business opportunity, but the bank needed someone from the family to sign as a guarantor. He smiled and said, "It's nothing serious. I only need your signature. After that, everything will be finished." My mother nodded and said, "We're family. We should help each other." One by one, everyone around the table agreed. My aunt laughed and said I was worrying too much. My uncle said people who trusted their families never wasted time reading every page. Everyone acted as if signing was the easiest thing in the world. I looked at the papers, but there were too many pages filled with words I didn't understand. I quietly asked, "Can I take these home and read them first?" The smiles on their faces disappeared almost at once. My father leaned forward and said, "Why would you need to read them? Don't you trust your own family?" My brother's voice became sharper as he said, "You're making this much harder than it needs to be." The room suddenly felt heavy. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for me to pick up the pen. The more I asked simple questions, the more impatient they became. Something inside me told me not to rush. I slowly pushed the papers back across the table and said, "I'm sorry, but I won't sign anything until I understand exactly what it says." The room fell completely silent. Then my mother shook her head with disappointment, and someone behind me whispered, "How selfish." Within seconds, the whole family was looking at me like I had betrayed them. I hardly slept that night. I kept thinking about what had happened at the family gathering. I believed everyone would calm down by morning and we could talk like adults. But as soon as I woke up, my phone started ringing. My aunt was the first to call. Before I could even say hello, she said, "Sibusiso, your parents have done everything for you. How could you refuse to help your own brother?" I tried to explain that I only wanted to read the papers before signing, but she ended the call before listening. A few seconds later, another call came, then another. Soon, my phone was full of calls and messages from cousins, uncles, and relatives I had not spoken to in months. Every one of them said almost the same thing. "You're selfish. Family should come first. Your brother needs you. Why are you making such a small thing into a big problem?" It felt strange because they all used nearly the same words. It was as if someone had given them the same story to repeat. Not one person asked me what had really happened. Not one person wanted to hear my side. They had already decided I was the bad person. As the hours passed, the messages became even more painful. Some relatives told me I was embarrassing my parents. Others said I was breaking the family apart. One cousin even wrote that if my brother lost his business chance, it would be my fault forever. I sat quietly, reading every message again and again. I asked myself one simple question. How did everyone know about what happened so quickly? The dinner had ended only a few hours earlier. Someone had called almost the entire family before sunrise. Whoever did it wanted everyone to believe I had refused to help my brother without any reason. The real story had been changed before I even opened my eyes that morning. I thought about calling everyone back to explain, but I knew they were no longer listening. Their minds were already made up. The more I looked at the messages, the more one thing became clear. This was not a normal family disagreement anymore. It felt planned. Someone wanted me to feel guilty until I gave up and signed those papers without asking another question. That frightened me more than the papers themselves. If the documents were really so simple, why was there such a desperate effort to turn my own family against me? A few days later, I tried to forget everything and focus on my work. I told myself that staying busy would help me stop thinking about my family's anger. That morning, I was meeting an elderly client who wanted advice about renovating an old building. He was calm, polite, and spoke very kindly. We spent nearly an hour discussing the project. As we finished, he looked at the papers on my desk where my full name was written. He slowly read it aloud. Sibusiso Dlamini. Then he looked up at me with a surprised expression. Are you related to the Dlamini family from outside Durban? He asked. I smiled politely and said, yes, my late grandfather was from that side of the family. The old man became very quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly as if he had remembered something from many years ago. I knew your grandfather, he said softly. He was a careful man. He never made important decisions without reading every document. His words immediately caught my attention. Very few people outside my family even knew my grandfather. Then he asked me another question that completely confused me. Does your family still own the old property outside the city? I frowned. What property? I asked honestly. I don't know anything about any property. The old man's face changed. He looked surprised that I had no idea what he was talking about. He stayed silent for a few seconds, almost as if he was deciding whether he should say anything more. Finally, he stood up, picked up his hat, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned around and looked directly at me. His voice became serious. Young man, he said, be very careful what you sign when old family assets are involved. Then he smiled politely, wished me a good day, and walked away without another word. I remained standing in my office, unable to move. His warning stayed in my mind long after he had gone. I had never heard anyone in my family mention property outside the city. My parents had always acted as if we owned nothing except our home. If there really was another family property, why had nobody ever told me about it? As I sat down, I remembered the thick folder my brother had pushed toward me. Everyone had insisted it was only about his business opportunity. But now, for the first time, I wondered if those papers had nothing to do with his business at all. Was that why nobody wanted me to read them? Was there something hidden inside those pages that connected to a family secret I had never been told? The old man's warning no longer felt like a simple conversation. It felt like someone had quietly tried to protect me before it was too late. The old man's warning stayed in my mind every single day. No matter how hard I tried to forget it, I could not stop thinking about his words. I kept asking myself the same questions. What family property was he talking about? Why had nobody ever mentioned it to me? And why was everyone so desperate for my signature? The more I thought about it, the less the story about my brother's business made sense. A few days later, I went in my parents' house to return a toolbox I had borrowed from my father. I did not tell anyone. I was coming because I only planned to stay for a few minutes. The front door was slightly open, so I walked inside and called out, but nobody answered. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard my brother Thado talking on his phone in the next room. His voice was low, almost like he did not want anyone else to hear him. I was about to leave quietly when one sentence stopped me where I stood. He said, "Don't worry. He doesn't need to know until everything is approved." My heart began beating faster. I stayed completely still, listening carefully. There was a short silence before he spoke again. "Once it's finished, there won't be anything he can do about it." I could not hear the other person's voice, but my brother sounded calm, as if they had already discussed this many times before. At that moment, the floor beneath my foot made a small noise. Thado turned around quickly and saw me standing in the hallway. His face changed immediately. The confident smile disappeared. Without another word, he ended the call and slipped his phone into his pocket. "Oh, you're here," he said with a forced smile. "I was just talking about a customer." I looked at him and asked, "A customer?" It sounded important. He laughed nervously and waved his hand. "It's nothing. Just business problems. You know how these things are." His answer did not feel natural. He quickly changed the subject and asked why I had come to the house. For the first time in my life, I felt like my own brother was hiding something from me. As I drove home, his words kept playing over and over in my mind. He doesn't need to know until everything is approved. Approved by whom? And what exactly was being approved? That sentence had nothing to do with asking me for help. It sounded like someone was trying to keep me in the dark until it was too late to stop them. Suddenly, I was no longer sure those papers were connected to a business opportunity. I began to believe they were only using the business story to make me sign without asking questions. Whatever was really happening, it was much bigger than anyone in my family was willing to admit. After hearing my brother's phone call, I could no longer believe everything was a simple misunderstanding. Too many strange things had happened in only a few days. My family wanted my signature without questions. My relatives had turned against me overnight. An elderly client had warned me about old family property. Now my brother had accidentally said something that made it clear I was being kept in the dark. I still had no answers, but I knew one thing. I could not let anyone pressure me into signing anything. 2 days later, something happened that I never expected. While I was working in my office, my receptionist told me an elderly woman wanted to see me. She did not have an appointment, but she said it was very important. When I walked into the waiting area, I recognized her face immediately. She was Mrs. Kumalo, my late grandmother's closest friend. She had been part of our family for as long as I could remember, but after my grandparents passed away, I had rarely seen her. She smiled kindly and asked if we could talk somewhere private. We sat in a quiet meeting room. For a few moments, she simply looked at me with gentle eyes, almost as if she was trying to decide how to begin. Finally, she took a deep breath and said, "Sibusiso, I heard there are people asking you to sign some papers." I looked at her with surprise. "How did you know that?" She smiled sadly. "News travels quickly in families." Then her face became serious. "There is something I have carried in my heart for many years. I always hoped I would never need to tell you." I listened carefully as she continued. "Many years ago, your grandfather spoke to me about you. He told me that one day you might be asked to sign important documents in a hurry. He looked at me and said, 'If that day ever comes, tell Sibusiso never to sign anything until he understands.' Every single page." I stared at her in complete silence. She slowly shook her head. I asked him why he was saying that, but he only smiled and told me that the right time would come. He never explained anything else. A chill ran through my body. My grandfather had died years before any of this happened. How could he have guessed that I would one day be under pressure to sign documents? Mrs. Kumalo reached across the table and gently held my hand. "I don't know what those papers are about," she said softly. "Your grandfather never told me. I have wondered about his words for years. But when I heard what your family was asking you to do, I knew I could not stay silent anymore." As she left my office, I realized I still did not know the truth. Neither did she. But one thing was now impossible to ignore. My grandfather had expected this moment long before any of us did, and somehow he had tried to protect me from a danger I still could not see. After my meeting with Mrs. Kumalo, I stopped arguing with my family. I realized that asking questions during phone calls or family visits was getting me nowhere. Every conversation ended the same way. They called me stubborn, selfish, and ungrateful. So I decided to do something different. Instead of refusing again, I calmly called my father and said, "If this is really just paperwork for Thato's business, please send me copies of every page. I will read everything carefully, and then I will give you my answer." There was a long silence on the phone. My father sounded surprised. He had probably expected another argument. Finally, he agreed and said the documents would be delivered the next day. When the envelope arrived, I placed it on my dining table and looked at it for a long time before opening it. It was much thicker than I remembered. There were many pages filled with legal words, signatures, and small print. I made some coffee, turned off my phone, and started reading slowly. I refused to skip a single page, no matter how boring or difficult it seemed. The first few pages looked exactly like what my brother had described. They talked about business financing, guarantor responsibilities, and loan conditions. For a moment, I wondered if I had been worrying for nothing. But I remembered my grandfather's warning and kept reading. Page after page, I carefully checked every sentence. Then, almost at the end of the documents, I found something that made me stop breathing for a moment. Hidden deep inside the paperwork was a legal clause that mentioned an old family asset. It was not written in large letters. It was buried among many other paragraphs, almost as if nobody expected me to notice it. I read the same paragraph again and again to make sure I had not misunderstood it. The document referred to property connected to my late grandfather's estate. My signature was linked to decisions involving that asset. During the family dinner, nobody had mentioned any family property. They had only talked about helping Thato's business. At that moment, everything changed. The papers were not only about a business loan. They reached far beyond that. The old man's warning, my brother's secret phone call, and Mrs. Kumalo's message from my grandfather suddenly felt connected. My family had hidden the most important part of the documents from me. The question was no longer whether I should sign. The real question was why they had worked so hard to keep this hidden until now. I did not call the whole family together. I did not accuse anyone or raise my voice. I wanted to know the truth, so I decided to speak to each person separately. If everyone was telling the truth, their answers would be the same. If they were hiding something, the differences would quickly appear. I visited my father first. I placed the documents on the table and pointed to the clause about my grandfather's property. I asked him one simple question. Why is this part here when everyone told me these papers were only about Thado's business? My father looked at the page for a few seconds before answering. Then he smiled and said, "You're worrying too much. That part is only there because of tax rules. It doesn't really change anything. These legal papers always include extra information." His answer did not satisfy me, but I thanked him and left without arguing. The next day, I visited my mother. I showed her the same page and asked the same question. She looked nervous almost immediately. Instead of talking about taxes, she quickly said, "It's only temporary. Once everything is approved, everything will go back to normal. You don't need to be afraid." I looked at her quietly. My father had said it was about taxes. My mother said it was only temporary. Those were completely different explanations. Later that evening, I met my brother. I gave him another chance to tell me the truth. As soon as he saw the documents open to that page, his smile disappeared. He did not mention taxes or anything temporary. Instead, he said, "You're reading too much into it. Those pages are just legal language. Everyone signs things like that." I asked him, "Then why didn't you tell me about my grandfather's property before asking me to sign?" He looked away and could not answer. I went home and read the documents again. The words on the page were clear. Nothing in the paperwork matched the stories my family had given me. 3 people had offered 3 different explanations for the same document. At least 2 of them had to be false. Maybe all of them were. News of my questions slowly spread through the family. This time, something unexpected happened. My aunts, who had called me selfish only days earlier, started asking questions of their own. One aunt phoned me and quietly admitted, "We were told you refused to help your brother for no reason." Nobody mentioned family property. Another aunt said she had never seen the documents herself. She had simply believed what she had been told. For the first time since all of this began, I realized I was no longer standing alone. The people who had judged me without listening were beginning to understand that they had only heard one side of the story. The picture they had been given was starting to fall apart. And if even my own aunts were beginning to doubt what they had been told, I knew the truth was getting closer than ever. As more questions began spreading through the family, I realized there was only one person who might know the truth. My grandfather had trusted a retired family advisor for many years. He had helped our family with important papers, property records, and legal matters. After my grandfather passed away, he retired and stayed away from family business. I found his phone number after asking one of my older relatives, and to my surprise, he agreed to meet me. We met at a small coffee shop on a quiet afternoon. He greeted me warmly and said I looked very much like my grandfather. I placed the documents on the table and told him everything that had happened. I explained how my family wanted me to sign quickly, how everyone became angry when I asked questions, and how I had discovered the hidden clause about my grandfather's property. He listened carefully without interrupting me. When I finished, he remained silent for a long moment. Then he slowly nodded, as if many pieces had finally come together. He looked at me and said, "Your grandfather was a very careful man. He loved every member of this family, but he also knew that money can sometimes make good people make bad decisions." I asked him what he meant. He opened the documents and pointed to the same clause that had been troubling me. Then he explained something that changed everything. Years before he died, my grandfather had arranged the ownership of certain family assets in a special way. He wanted to make sure that no single person could sell, transfer, or give away those valuable family properties without more than one person's approval. One of the required signatures was mine. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. So my signature was never just about helping Thado's business? I asked quietly. The advisor gently shook his head. "No," he replied. "Your signature is not a simple formality. Without it, those assets cannot be legally moved or sold. Your grandfather did that on purpose because he wanted an extra layer of protection for the family's future. At that moment, everything finally made sense. The pressure, the guilt, the angry phone calls, and the rushed documents were never only about a business opportunity. My signature was the one thing standing between my grandfather's wishes and whatever my family was trying to do. I was never just another person signing a form. I had been the final obstacle all along, and that was exactly why everyone had been so desperate to make me stop asking questions. A few days after I met my grandfather's advisor, my parents asked me to come to the house. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. There were no angry voices, no relatives waiting to judge me, and no papers placed in front of me. My father looked tired, and my mother could not even look me in the eyes. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then my father quietly said, "You deserve to know the truth." He admitted that our family had been struggling with financial problems for years. Some bad decisions had slowly turned into bigger problems. At the same time, my brother Thado's business had fallen into serious debt. The pressure had become so great that they believed selling my grandfather's property was the fastest way to solve everything. They convinced themselves that once the property was gone, all the family's problems would disappear. I listened without interrupting. Then I asked the question that had stayed in my heart from the beginning. If that was the truth, why didn't you simply tell me? The room became silent again. My mother finally answered with tears in her eyes. "Because we were afraid you would say no." Those words hurt more than anything else. Instead of trusting me with the truth, they had created a different story. They told everyone I was refusing to help my own brother. They made it sound as if I cared only about myself. They believed that if the whole family turned against me, I would feel so guilty that I would sign the papers without reading them. My father slowly nodded. "We thought family pressure would be stronger than your questions." At that moment, I finally understood why everyone had called me selfish. It was never really about refusing to help my brother. It was never about love or loyalty. It was part of a plan to make me feel ashamed until I gave them the one signature they needed. The painful part was not the property or the money. It was realizing that the people I trusted most had chosen manipulation instead of honesty. If they had come to me from the beginning and explained everything truthfully, we could have looked for solutions together. Instead, they turned the whole family against me. And in doing that, they almost destroyed the trust that had held our family together for so many years. I looked at my parents, took a deep breath, and made my final decision. I said, "I love this family, but I will not sign these papers." My voice was calm, and for the first time since everything had started, I felt completely sure of myself. I was not refusing because I wanted to hurt anyone. I was refusing because I finally understood what my grandfather had tried to protect. That property was more than land or money. It was part of our family's history, and I could not agree to give it away through pressure and hidden information. My father closed his eyes for a moment. My mother began to cry quietly. My brother looked disappointed, but nobody argued with me anymore. There was nothing left to say. The truth had already come out. They knew I understood everything, and they knew guilt would no longer change my mind. The following weeks were not easy. Some relatives still believed I had made the wrong decision, while others slowly began to understand why I had refused. I stayed away from family arguments and focused on my work. Instead of fighting with everyone, I chose peace. I knew I could not force people to agree with me, but I also knew I did not have to betray my own values just to earn their approval. Months passed, and something surprising happened. My brother did not lose everything as everyone had feared. He worked harder than ever before. He made difficult choices, cut unnecessary expenses, found new business opportunities, and slowly paid off his debts. It was not easy, but step by step, he rebuilt his finances without selling my grandfather's property. Watching him succeed through hard work made me realize that there had always been another way. It simply required patience and honesty. One evening, my parents invited me for dinner. This time, there were no documents on the table. After we finished eating, my father quietly said, "We made a terrible mistake." My mother nodded and added, "If we had trusted you with the truth from the beginning, we might have solved this together." We were so afraid of hearing no that we forgot to be honest. Hearing those words did not erase the pain, but it helped us begin to heal. We talked openly for hours, something we had not done in a very long time. Little by little, trust started to return. Looking back, I realized something that changed my life forever. I did not almost lose my family because I said no. I almost lost myself by believing that real love meant saying yes to everything without asking questions. That experience taught me that protecting your values is not selfish. Real love is built on honesty, respect, and trust, not fear, guilt, or blind obedience. Sometimes the bravest word you can say is no, because that one word can protect not only your future, but the people you love as well.